You won. I want to let that sit for a moment. Before the explanation, before the what you won and how and what today specifically means, and what being open to receive actually requires of the specific person this reading found, which is you. Just let it sit. You won in the full and specific and deserved form of someone who has been in something. That required the full and particular form of their specific combination of strength and patience and continuing, and who has brought all of that to the thing they were in, and who has arrived at the winning, not by luck, not by chance, not by being the random recipient of a favorable turn of circumstances. That could have gone to anyone, but to you specifically, because of the specific way you were in the thing you were in during the full period of the being in it, that produced the winning as its natural and arriving result. You won, and the blessings are starting today. Not eventually, not when the timing aligns more perfectly, not after one more thing has been handled or resolved or prepared for, in the specific and Virgo adjacent form of someone who is always preparing for the receiving rather than simply receiving what is already here. Today, the blessings are starting today. Welcome, my beautiful soul, and let yourself receive this before the blessings and what they look like, and how to be open to receiving them in the full and complete form that today is offering. I need to sit with something that I feel very clearly in your energy. And that is the most important thing to address before anything else, because it is the specific and particular thing that stands between the blessings that are starting today and the full receiving of them by the specific person they are starting for, which is you. I feel the specific difficulty of receiving, not in the general sense, of someone who does not want good things or who is opposed to the receiving of them in the available form that the blessings are taking as they arrive today, in whatever specific form your specific life is delivering them in. In the specific and particular form of someone who has learned that receiving requires something first before the receiving is available in the justified and comfortable form of something that has been earned before it is received in the specific and chronological order of earn then receive that the person with the receiving difficulty has been operating in for the full period of their life, in which they have been earning and receiving in that specific order. The difficulty is not with the wanting. The wanting is fully present in the specific and honest interior of the person reading this, who wants the blessings and wants them now and is not pretending otherwise. In the managed and composed form of someone who has learned to want things more quietly than they actually want them, for the specific and understandable reason that wanting quietly produces less pain When the wanted thing does not arrive, then wanting loudly does, in the full and unmanaged form of someone who wanted at full volume, and then experienced the cost of the not receiving at full volume. The difficulty is with the allowing of the receiving before the internal accounting of whether the receiving is currently warranted by the earning that has been done in the period that preceded the receiving has been completed in the specific and satisfied form of an internal accountant who has checked the ledger and confirmed that the receiving is proportionate to the earning that justifies it in the specific and earned form that the receiving requires of the person receiving it. Before the allowing happens in the justified and comfortable form that the internal accounting has confirmed is appropriate. Spirit wants me to say something to that internal accountant, and I am going to say it in the most direct form available because the internal accountant deserves the direct address rather than the gentle suggestion. That would leave room for the accounting to continue before the receiving is allowed in the justified form that the accounting is still working toward. The ledger is full, the earning is complete, and the receiving is not only warranted, it is overdue. In the specific and energy-based form of someone who is reading the actual field around your life today and finding in it the specific confirmation that the internal accounting has been working from an incomplete ledger in the particular and costly form of someone who has been accounting for the visible earning, but not for the invisible earning. That does not appear in the ledger. In the named and recorded form of the visible entries that the internal accountant has been using as the basis for the accounting, that determines whether the receiving is warranted. The invisible earning is the larger part of the ledger in the specific and significant form of everything that was not recorded in the named and visible entries of the internal accounting, but that was earned nonetheless. In the quiet and unannounced form of someone who earned without naming and without recording and without directing the internal accountant's attention toward what was being earned as it was being earned. In the invisible and unledgered form that has not been counted. In the accounting, that has been determining whether the receiving is warranted. It is warranted when the invisible earning is counted, which this reading is now counting, in the full and explicit form of someone who can see what the internal accountant cannot see, because the internal accountant does not have access to the invisible entries in the ledger it has been keeping without those entries as the basis for the accounting that this reading is now completing, with the invisible earning added to the visible in the full and complete ledger that confirms the receiving is warranted and overdue. And starting today, now what the blessings look like in the specific and arriving form of today and what today means in the specific and useful form. For the person who has been told that the blessings are starting today and who needs to know what to watch for in the form that today delivers, for the specific person it is delivering it to. Today is not a single dramatic event. I want to say that first, because today, as a container for the blessings starting, can produce the expectation of a visible and significant thing, arriving in the specific and unmistakable form of a blessing that announces itself clearly as the beginning of the blessings that today is named as the start of. In this reading, today is a threshold in the specific and significant form of a moment that separates what was before from what is after, not in the dramatic and announced way of someone crossing a threshold that has banners on either side of it and fireworks overhead and everyone watching the crossing happen. In the visible and celebrated form of something significant being publicly marked, but in the quiet and interior way of someone who crosses a threshold without a ceremony and who is on the other side of it before they fully realize that the crossing has happened, in the specific and unceremonious form of the most significant crossings, which are often the ones that do not announce themselves as the thresholds they are until after the crossing has happened and the other side is already where the person is standing, without having registered the specific moment of the crossing that put them there. You crossed a threshold today in the reading of this message in the specific and quiet and significant form of the most meaningful crossings that do not announce themselves as the thresholds they are until they have already been crossed. The threshold is the moment of accepting that the ledger is full and the receiving is warranted, and the internal accountant can rest from the accounting that has been determining whether the receiving is appropriate in the specific and completed form of an accounting that no longer needs to be active because the ledger has been confirmed as full by this reading, and the receiving can begin without waiting for the accountant to complete the accounting. That was never going to fully confirm the receiving because the invisible entries were never going to appear in the ledger of an accountant who does not have access to the invisible without the reading that named them as what was always there in the unledgered and invisible form that the accounting had been missing. Whew. The blessings in the specific and arriving form of what today is beginning for the person who crossed the threshold of the reading that named the invisible earning and confirmed the ledger as full are 3 in number and arriving in the overlapping and accumulating form of something that does not arrive all at once, but that begins today and builds in the days that follow today into the full and complete form of the winning that this reading named in the first 2 words of the first line that said what needed to be said before anything else was said. The first blessing is clarity in the specific and arriving form of something that has been unclear in the situation or the relationship or the direction. That has been carrying the quality of uncertainty that the not yet clear produces in the person who is in it becoming clear, not in the dramatic form of a revelation, but in the quiet form of a settling in which things arrange themselves into the readable form that they could not take before today in the before the threshold period of the accounting that was still running and the invisible earning that had not yet been named as what was always in the ledger. The second blessing is connection in the specific and deepening form of something that has been present, but that has been receiving the muffled and partially available version of the person behind the accounting rather than the full and available version that the threshold crossing is making accessible for the first time in the full and unaccounting form of someone who is no longer checking the ledger before allowing the connection to receive the full version of the person who has been in the accounting first form for the full period of the accounting that the threshold crossing is completing. And the third blessing is the most significant because it is the one that produces the others as its natural result rather than the other way around. The third blessing is rest in the specific and earned form of the internal accountant finally being told that the accounting is done and that the ledger is full and that what is warranted without further checking required in the releasing form of a function that has been running at the background of the interior for the full period of the accounting, and that can now stop running because the accounting has been completed by this reading in the full and ledger closing form of someone who has looked at the full ledger, including the invisible entries, and confirmed that the accounting is done. And the receiving can begin without the accountant running its checks in the background of every receiving that has been allowed, that rest in the specific and physical form of what the background function stopping feels like in the body of the person whose background has been running the accounting function for the full period of the before the threshold is something I want to describe because I want you to be able to recognize it. When it arrives in the specific embodied form of what the function stopping feels like from the inside of the person whose background it stops in, it feels like a particular kind of quiet, not the absence of sound, but the absence of a background hum that has been present for so long that the person inside it stopped registering it as a hum and started registering it as silence. Even though it was not silence, but the continuous hum of the background accounting function running its checks on every receiving that was attempted in the ledger checking form of an accountant that never rested. When the function stops, the actual silence, is unmistakably different from what the person had been calling silence while the hum was still running, beneath the surface of the interior experience as the background function that this reading is stopping. In the full ledger and accounting done form of the confirmation that the invisible earning has been counted and the receiving is warranted and overdue, and starting today, I want to speak to a voice now. That I feel clearly in your energy, and that I want to address directly. Before it receives the U1 in the reactive and undermining form that it sometimes takes when it has not been met first, the voice says, winning sounds good, but what exactly was the competition? And what exactly was won? And is the winning real? Or is it the language of encouragement that arrives before the evidence of what was won has arrived in the specific and confirmable form that the voice requires before it will accept the winning as the real and specific thing, rather than the atmospheric and warming language of a reading that wants the person receiving it to feel good, before the evidence of the feeling good has arrived in the external and confirmable form that the voice is waiting for. That voice is the internal accountant, still running its checks on the U1 before allowing the U1 to be received in the full and landing form of something that does not need the check to be real, because it is already real. In the ledger full and invisible earning counted form that this reading has confirmed in the direct and non-atmospheric form of someone who has looked at the actual field and found the confirmation there before naming it here in the U1 form that the accountant is running its checks on. Tell the accountant that the checks are done, that the ledger is full, that the invisible earning has been counted, and that the receiving can begin today without the further checking that the accountant was planning to run before the receiving was allowed in the fully checked and confirmed as warranted form that the accountant requires for the receiving to be comfortable, rather than the unreceipted and unaccounted form that the beginning today blessings are arriving in for the person who crossed the threshold of this reading and whose accountant can now rest. I want to give you something before I close in the permission form that the internal accountant person reading this specifically needs as the threshold crossing completes and the blessings begin today. In the three arriving forms of clarity and connection and rest, permission to receive today without earning more first, in the specific and releasing form of someone who puts the ledger down before it is fully checked, because it does not need to be more fully checked than this reading has already checked it. In the full and invisible earning included form, that confirms the receiving as warranted and overdue and beginning today for the specific person who won by being in the thing they were in the full and particular form of everything they brought to it over the full period of the being in it that produced the winning as its natural and arriving result. Whew, you won, my beautiful soul, and the ledger has always said so.